it's muted. Ah, I was just tricking him. Okay, can you guys hear now? Okay, so one thing I said that you guys should know is for the people that are here on the Zoom session to post their name in the chat so I can see you. And then I'll get you on the attendance. Okay, so Creately is just kind of an easier way than downloading Visio. Visio is great. It's got some wonderful features that we could use. But for today, we want to start looking at creating methods. If you remember, subprograms in C#. So I thought, you know, if we just drew a really quick hierarchy chart of what methods we were going to create for our program, kind of design time, it would help us focus on it. So I think this sitemap looks like the best fit for hierarchy charts. And I'll take the tour later. So the first program that I want to create, or first example of a method, is we're going to create a method that just displays output. So our first program, let's say we're going to call it method I'm trying to think of a good name. Practice output. So this will be a void method. We won't have any sort of return value from this method. I just want a couple of boxes on here. My dumbness will show. Okay. Why won't you work? There's my blank page. And then I want to add a triangle. Coming soon. Okay, so I'm finding shapes. I just want a plain old rectangle. We don't need anything fancy. See if I can put that on our chart. I might change my mind and say, okay, darn it, we're going to use Visio because I know how to use it. I'm showing my ignorance here with Creately. Let me Visio it. Can't waste you guys' time. Now, since I'm bailing and going to Visio, I'm going to look for a Visio template that would work. And if you've got ideas, you just yell out. You may have done this a million times, not me. Da, da, da. Do what? Calendar? Where are you seeing it? You just seen it? Let's just use basic flowchart. I'm going to create it blank. I don't need any default stuff. And I am more used to Visio. I obviously need to use Creately more. But with Visio, I've already got my blank page. And over here on the side where I have my shapes, I'm just going to drag a process shape onto my page. And I'm going to double click and say this is going to be my main method. And then underneath that, I'm going to put another rectangle. And this is going to be our method to output some information. And I'll just name this method output info. Now, if I want to show the connection between these two, I could add a line. I could use the connector tool here and connect the two. Any way that you want to draw a line is fine. Sometimes the design tools, like developing this little hierarchy chart, can take a few minutes. And it can be hard for us to decide if it's worth it, especially when the instructor tries all these different tools. But I think it does give us a visual idea of what we're going to do for this one, and that'll be really easy to create some real quick ones for the other methods that we want to try. practicing today. So let's open Visual Studio and create this. Whoops, my output info, oh, it does, it should have an uppercase O. Sometimes I slip into Java ways and make my method start with lowercase letters, and that would be bad in C#. So I'm going to open Visual Studio. And I'd like to create one solution that's going to hold most, if not all, of the practice projects that we'll do today so that you can find them all. So let's do File, New, Project. Check your location and make sure that it's going to save the application in the place that you want. And then I'm going to change my project name up here to be display message void or something like that, because that's what we're going to do in this application. My solution name, however, I want that to be different. Let's make it Chapter 4 Method Practice. And then we'll try to keep all of our methods in here. Everybody get it okay? Now, last time when we created a couple of projects, we left our program.cs named program.cs, and we saw that we would have a program.cs file in every project, which could be confusing. So let's rename that program.cs file. We can. I'm going to right-click on it and rename. You can double-click to rename whatever you want to do. The important thing, do not overwrite the .cs, because our file type needs to say CS for C#. So let's name this display message void. Now, when we change a .cs file like that, Visual Studio is going to automatically update the class name within the file, and we want that to happen. So say yes. You want those other components updated. So notice how the class name within our .cs file has to match the name of the .cs file. We hadn't worried about that before because we just left it as program. So we decided in our chart that we're going to have a method called output info. Whenever we're coding, it can be helpful to create our methods, or at least our method headers, our method signatures first, because that way when we put in a call to those methods, we won't get an error. So it's kind of like creating an outline of our program. We said this is going to be a void method, and I'll try to be consistent with my naming. We want it to be called output info. Now our output info method is not going to have any parameters passed to it, no input or output. So I'm going to have an open and closing parenthesis without anything in them. I'm going to give it a second, and because this is a void method, we shouldn't have any errors, leaving it just like this. So this method signature would be valid. Let's put some comments up here about this method signature. I'm going to do some comments with just 2 slashes. And let's document our method. Now these comments are for us as programmers, so I would consider these kind of learning comments. They wouldn't necessarily be the kind of comments we would put in a program at work, right? Because those work comments would be a little bit different, but our learning comments are to help us. So we're going to say this method is a void method because it has no output, no return statement. Now our method requires no input, So our parentheses are empty. So however you would like to phrase that is meaningful to you, because that may mean nothing to you, but it means something to me, but I don't have anything in there. Now at the end of chapter 3, I told you there were some great extra things that you would want to refer to throughout the semester. And one of them is some date time stuff. So let's see if we could print out something like today's date time. I want to do some console.writeLine statements. And I know I could use that using static statement, but every once in a while it's good to remind you guys that that console keyword is going to be out there when you look at stuff online, when you Google things. So let's say, welcome to the output method. The date is, and then let's output like date time dot now. And let's see what kind of output format we get if we do that. Now our main method is still our program entry point. So let's put some comment notes up there for that. So even though we renamed our program.cs file, that didn't affect the fact that our main method is the one that the runtime system is going to be searching for to start up our application. So the main method is your program controller. Right, because it's going to decide what happens next. So for this program, let's put some code in our main method. A lot of times, it seems to be helpful to comment the ending curly brace. So on my closing curly brace for my main method, I'm going to put a comment and say this is the end of my main method. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on our output info method. End of output info method. So in our main method, we need to actually call our output info method. So we want to do that within our main method body, which is our open and closing curly braces. So let's put a comment, call the output info method. Now to call our method, all we do is say its name. And then we have to specify the open and closing parentheses to show that we don't have any parameters to be passed to our method. Now I've got an error. Do you have an error? Let's see what it's complaining about. It's kind of a weird error message, isn't it? It says that an object reference is required for the non-static field method or property display message void.output info. Well, what it's complaining about is the static keyword. Our main method is marked as static. From a static method like that, we can only call other static methods. And we'll be talking about that kind of over the whole semester, how that works and what's going on. But if we say something is static, we say basically it only exists in memory one time. There's only one of them. So I'm going to mark our new method as static also, and that should make our error go away. Now, before we run this, let's go ahead and continue our closing curly brace practice here. This pink one, for me, is the end of the display message void class. And then my orange one is the end of the display message void namespace. So you can see our comments, you know, they're green, they kind of stay away from the code, but they do tend to really clutter things up. So it's kind of a trade-off. So I like to put comments in for us, these learning kind of comments, but then sometimes we want to minimize it a little bit so we can focus on the code. So I totally see it both ways. But it looks like we're ready to try this. So I've got some yellow bars over here telling me that there's a lot of stuff that I haven't saved. If I go ahead and run this, is Visual Studio going to save all those changes automatically? Yep. Just turned green, didn't it? Okay. Now I didn't press Control F5. Let me do that. So I see our message, welcome to the output method, and then it displays our current date just like we wanted. Perfect. So if we were to need to format that date somehow differently, what would be a good thing for us to Google? What would be a good search? We'd start out C#, right? Whoops. Let me click there. C#, then what? What kind of data do I want to format?
Date time.
Date time? You think that would be a good next thing? Then what? What do we want to do with our date time? Anybody? Oh, somebody's ready on the chat here. Let's see what they say. Can't find it. Format. Good. So it might help if I did output format. But yes, formatting is what we want. So remember those keywords. Anytime you can remember those keywords when you're searching for some sort of syntax, it's going to help you to narrow right into that you want. Here's custom date and time format strings from Microsoft. So that's pretty specific. That's what we want. So I could scroll down and see what kind of examples they give us. Here they've got some things where they take the date and they run it through a special method called toString to do some formatting. We hadn't really seen that before. But this one down here, where they're using the parameter replacement, they've got the 0, which we've seen before, and then they've got mm/dd. Let's try that. I'm going to copy it. So I want to put that within my string. The date is, and then instead of the plus sign here, to add the date time to my string, I would need the comma to say use the date time as a replacement for this parameter. So I'd have to change that syntax just a little bit. Now let's see if that works and gives us a different format. There we get the -6. That ZZZ is telling us that's how far we are from Greenwich Green Time. So we can find all that great information out suppress our leading zeros, and all sorts of great stuff like that. So we can always use those formatting tools that we've looked at. Inderpaul says that he just found out that his PC is off by a couple hours. And that can really cause trouble with Windows updates and things like that. So that's a good thing for us with our date time. All right, so to summarize here, we created this program that uses our main method, and our main method calls a method that we created, a user-defined method called output info. We created or user-defined our method, and then we found out that we had to add the static keyword, because since our main is static, any methods that it calls must also be marked static. And in our next chapter, we'll figure out how to get around that, because sometimes that can be a problem. So beautiful. This one looks great. Is everybody's working? Got it all? Okay, good. All right, so let's create another project in our solution. So remember, you're going to click over here in Solution Explorer on your solution, and we can right click and add new project. Now in this project, we're going to prompt the user for some input in the method that we create, and then return that input value to our calling method. So let's name this one prompt input string. And in Visio, if I were to say, how is this one going to be different? In our hierarchy chart, it's not going to be very different at all. I just will be calling a method called prompt for input string here instead of our output info. So we would have to add data to this hierarchy chart for us to be able to tell that there was a difference here, that this method was going to return data. Hierarchy chart wise, it's just the same. So I can, whoops, I've got that connector tool. If I go back to my pointer tool, I can select all and copy and paste, and then I'll just change this and say this is going to be prompt input string. Oops, got a typo there in my main. Fix it. So nothing too complicated. We're just going to call one method. Let's do that. Now, we can start labeling everything here. End of solution. End of class. End of main. And like one semester I was going to stop doing this because it's so annoying, you know, and some people are just like, ah, why do you do that? And then I had a couple students come in and say, you know, that's like the most helpful thing. So they were doing it at their jobs, which I would recommend against, but it's not going to hurt anything, I guess. Okay, so after the end of our main, let's create our new method. And that's another reason I like to label those closing curly braces, because that gives me a good spot of reference to say, okay, this is where we're going to be. So for this one, I want to prompt a user. We know we're going to have to make it static. And in this method, we're going to return the string value that we get from our user back to our caller. So instead of it being a void method, it's going to return a string data type. Did I name that right? Yeah, we want it named prompt input string, and we're not going to have any parameters here for this method. Now, last time we created our method, as soon as we got our curly braces in, the IDE kind of did some looking around at things and got rid of all the errors. It said, great, that looks fine. This time, that's not happening. Instead, our method name is still being underlined with the curly red. So what's it complaining about? Not all code paths return a value. We're going to keep getting that error until we put a return statement in this method. So if we were trying to just do an outline of our code and we just wanted to get this method in here as a placeholder, we could put some sort of return placeholder statement in there or something like that, just to show that we know it's not ready, you know, it's still outstanding. And then we can get rid of that error message. But otherwise, we can't leave that method header sitting there in our code without some sort of return statement. I'm going to label that ending curly brace. Now, what we want to do in this method is actually prompt our user for input. So we need to have a write line statement first to prompt them. So we'll say, please enter your name. I need a string variable to hold that name. So I'll declare that variable at the top of my method. Let's call it username. Now I can use that variable to hold whatever the user types. So we want to do a read line to get their input. Now, instead of returning that silly placeholder string, we can return our actual username variable. So now this method is intact. It's a little bit longer than our first one. So first, oops, let me Control Z. I want to use some comments here out to the side. This one, we're just declaring our variable. Displaying our prompt. Reading their input. And finally, returning that data to our caller. So we're outputting our data from our method. So in our main as our controller again, we want to call that method. We'll put the name of our method, followed by the opening, closing parenthesis. Interpol says that he had an error because he renamed the program.cs to the same thing, prompt input string. And after we test our program, let's rename our program.cs because we want to do that. And we'll just be sure to make it something a little bit different than our method names. Thanks, Andrew Paul. Now I should be able to run this. I'm going to press Control F5. It seems like it's running my previous project. Was there something I could do to fix that? And I have multiple projects. What did we do? Can you think? Can't think of it. It was in Solution Explorer. Yeah. Set as startup project. So yep, we right clicked on it and set as startup. Good. There's so much stuff everywhere in Visual Studio. Okay, now let's run it again. Control F5. We should see the right project. So I prompted for the name, but I don't know if it actually all worked. I need to declare a variable in the main to hold that output from our method. So this is also going to be a string variable. And let's call it main name, because it can be a little different. Now I'm going to use that variable to receive the output from our method. So notice if I didn't save that output, C# doesn't care. It's like, you don't want to? Okay, fine. It's up to you. It'll just go away into the bit bucket and we won't ever see it. But I would like to save that output. So now I'm going to do a final console.writeLine and say, you entered and then comma main name. See if it works. I'll enter my name. And then I'm getting my output, so that looks great. Everybody's okay? Working all right? Okay, so a couple of things that I could do different. In the prompt for input string, change the write line to just a write. And let's run that and notice the difference. Control F5. See how I'm typing on the same line because it didn't advance down to a new line, because write line says write this stuff, then advance to a new line. Write says just write this stuff out to the console. That can be an important difference depending on what you're trying to do. Now the read is the same way. If we change this from read line to just read, we're gonna have some trouble, right? What's it say? Read, it only reads one character. So it would expect us to save that into a char data type variable. And that wouldn't do us any good because we asked the user to enter their whole name. So one character wouldn't be helpful to us at all. So I'll Control Z to put that back. So we've got some nice methods here as examples. Let's fix our program.cs file. I'm going to rename it So let's right click and rename. And let's just call it input string method, since Interpol said it did not like being the same. And yes, I want to change it everywhere. And after I do a change like that, I want to test and make sure I didn't mess up my program. And whether you use a write statement or a write line for your prompt, it's totally up to you, however you want it to look. Just want you to know that you have that option of changing everything.
What's the 0 to 950?
That's our parameter. So just like we were doing the other day where we printed out like all those 9s with all those different values, and we had that 0 parameter. So anytime we want to put a variable into our output string, we can put a parameter like that, and then after the string, we list all of the variables to use for replacement. So look at some of those others that we did. So this one is looking great. I'd like to add a little bit more to it, but I don't want to get it all confused. So let's go back to Visio first and think about making this a little bit more substantial. I think that I'd like for the user to enter their name, and then I'd like for us to kind of update their name. What I was thinking is I'd like to make all of the letters in their name uppercase and maybe replace one letter with a lowercase value after we've made everything uppercase, just to work at doing some manipulation with some things. So let's update this hierarchy chart. I'm going to copy and paste. And so I think I want this one. We're going to have our prompt input string method that we'll copy from our current program. Move it over a little bit. And then besides prompting for an input string, we're going to have a method reformat string. And I'm going to try to add that with my connector tool. So our main now is going to call both of those methods. So let's do that. So the first thing I want to do is create a new project. So in my solution, I'm going to do add new project. Move Visio over here so I can see it. And let's make this reformat string. And I want my reformat string to be my startup project. So I'll set it as the startup project. And I want to rename my program.cs. And I'll make it reformat string method. Now our input string method has some code that I would like to copy. So I'm going to click on its tab. And the first thing I'm going to copy is our prompt input string method. And I'm going to be pretty specific about what I copy, because when copying, it's really, really easy to have issues with curly braces and other problems. So I'm going to be super careful about it here at first. Now I've got, bless you, I've got my method copied. I'm going to go, whoops, to my new program and paste that right after the closing curly brace from my main. Now I can go ahead and copy the code from my main. Those just 3 lines. So that looks good. He said with copying and pasting, be careful here at first because it can be easy to get things really mangled. I'm going to go ahead and label some stuff. Here's the end of the main. The pink is the end of our class. The orange, end of our solution. Okay, so now we've got a name here, and we want to create a new method that's going to accept that name as input and do some things to it and then return it. So let's put this new method right after our main. And we know we've got to make it static. And this method is going to expect a string as input and return a string as output. So our data type in our method header will be string. Now, when we start with our parameters, we need parameters this time. And I'm going to expect a string, and we're going to call this the letter. So the first thing I want to do is convert this string to uppercase. So my string came in. Oops, I need 2 things. Look at me. What I'd like, I think I want is input, develop here as we go. First of all, we need the name. And then I want the letter that I'm going to look for and change from uppercase to lowercase. So we have 2 parameters. So first of all, the name, we want to convert it to uppercase. So how can we do that? See if you can find something. It's in our textbook in chapter 3, but you should be able to find something online if you Google that. So C# string would be a good place to start. When I look at the Microsoft documentation, it can be kind of confusing at first, and that's why I want you guys to Google and search for things. because understanding the documentation and what they're telling you is really, really super important. Now, if you scroll down, you should see some examples. One thing to notice, and you'll find it too in the REPA, we'll have some culture info things that we have to be concerned about, but in general, you should be able to leave the culture info information out of your calls. We shouldn't have to worry about it too much. We do have to worry about it with REPL though. So I'm seeing some examples here. Oh, there's one. String 2 is an uppercase copy of str1. So string 2 equals string 1 dot to upper. So that's probably the syntax that we want to use, is that to upper method. So I can set the name equal to the name dot to upper. So now we were able to use the same variable to hold our output. Does this method know what that original name was anymore? No, because now it just only has the uppercase version of it. So that's fine, but if there were a reason in our program that we needed to keep track of that, we would need another variable to hold our output. Okay, so we could return the name then. Now it's in uppercase. But we said we were also going to take this letter that they passed to us and use it to convert any occurrences of that letter back to lowercase. So that gives us a lot of work, doesn't it? First of all, we need to have a work variable. Do we want them to pass us this letter in uppercase or in lowercase? We're going to have to make that rule, right? We'll say that they're going to pass it to us in uppercase, and we're going to convert it then to lower. So we have an example of both. Now again, I want to find some documentation. I'm going to just show you how to do it. So C# string replace. I want to do a replacement of some letters, so I'll try that. And there I am, some Microsoft, again, beautiful documentation. So it says that we can use this replace one string with another string. So let's see their example. They've got a parameter and all sorts of messy stuff in there, but basically right here they do str.replace, and we want to replace any space with a comma. So ours should be a little bit easier to read. Let's see if we can do that. So now we're going to say, take that name and replace some things. I want you to replace the letter with the letter in lowercase. Now for our program, eventually we're going to, and this is just like theoretical talking, we might not actually come back and change this program, but we can pretend or surmise that eventually we would be adding a prompt for our users asking them what letter they wanted to replace in that name, right? But we could go ahead and put in some hard-coded values to test our program to simulate that user input. So let's try it. After our console.write line, I'm going to, in our main, I want to do another console.write line, and I'm going to output just like some hyphens to kind of be a border. Now I'm going to say that our main name is going to be updated by our reformat string method. And our reformat string method, first of all, notice this really cool thing about Visual Studio and IntelliSense. Right here, where my cursor is, I'm ready to enter parameter values for this call. And underneath that, IntelliSense is telling me, helping me, saying the first parameter you need is a string that's going to be the name. The second parameter you need is a letter. So it's telling us what kind of parameters need to be passed. So the name we want to pass in is our main name. And let's say the letter we want to use, I'm going to say E for my name. And you could try a different letter for your name if you have a bunch of a certain letter. And then let's output that. Revised name. And we're still going to use our main name parameter or variable. Okay, I'm going to press Control F5 to run it and see what kind of terrible things it does. My name. Oh, it worked. Does everybody's work? Need some help? Samples here. We're going to be working on methods and looking at things like this for a long time. Okay, so this gives you some good examples of some methods, but we can make methods to do anything we want. So you're always going to be seeing more. In the REPL, to create some methods, it's actually a pretty short one, but there's parts of it that can be challenging. So I wanted to have time today to work on that in class while I'm here. Whenever you're working on the REPLs, let me save this here. I'll end reformat string. I'm going to do a save all. Now this solution has a sample for you of a void method that just displays to the console, of an input prompt method that prompts for a string. Right now, we could change that to prompt for an integer or prompt for a double, but we haven't done any examples of validating that data to make sure they give us an integer or a double. So that's okay, we would just use it. There are some things like that that you might run into in the REPLs. And then we also have an example method that accepts input and returns output. So that's what we were wanting here in these examples, are methods that you could refer to when you need to do the same type thing. All right, so I'm going to save all that and close this. And I'm going to go look at that REPL. REPL stands for read, execute, print, loop. And as you can see with our code that we developed today, we're getting to that point, right? So we did a read and execute, We are printing, but we are not quite looping yet. We will be soon. You guys are ready too, I know. I'm holding you back. Canvas seems tired today. Okay, so we're to the lesson 4 REPL course. Make sure that link is good because REPL links are a real pain in the neck. So this course is called Control the Flow with Subprograms. So what we're going to be working on the next few weeks is controlling the flow of our program. How does it progress through execution? And the first important thing that we can do is create subprograms. So you can see this REPL, there are some things that they're all creating methods. You're going to prompt for input, format some output. Going to build an app. Nice. No, I have not seen that before. Error loading. Are we broke? I always hit that refresh button in REPL if it does really weird things to you. Hopefully it'll refresh. Yeah, if you get that message where it says you're like disconnecting or cannot contact server or something, do the refresh. We don't pay, and we have a lot of activity. Okay, so when you're in the REPL, I'm in here as a student, I think. Let me check. I'll make sure I'm in here as a student. I come in, I'm looking at the instructions. Things are crazy. I can actually put some stuff in here. It looks like I'm in overtype mode. I'm going to press insert. Now it's just being weird. It's mad at me because it knows I'm the teacher. So anyways, I could press enter, put in some comments or things, and say it doesn't work right and I'm really frustrated and I can't get it to work. Go ahead and submit it. And REPL is going to say, this doesn't match the required output. Do you want to submit anyways? And you say, yes, I want to submit anyways. And send me an email or send me a message on Discord that you submitted this certain REPL in this certain REPL class. Because remember, there's lots of REPL classes, and as people get behind and stuff, it can be real hard to know where you are. But tell me exactly what class I can find your stuff in, and then I can go look at it. So for me, as the teacher, see if I can find any. I can go in and look at all the assignments, and I can see over here if somebody has submitted an assignment with a question, and then I can go look at it and I can run your code and I can send you a message back. Try changing this, try changing that, try doing something different. So this is one of the main reasons I want to use REPL. In the summer, remember I have that 5-week C# class. 5 weeks is really fast to go through all this material. We wouldn't be able to make it through that material if students didn't use this facility, because as they're practicing things, they ran into a problem, they would submit it to me and I would, as quickly as I could, try to get it back to them so that they could keep moving, because you guys know how hard it is. You get yourself finally in the mode, you're working, you've got everything that you need at your computer, everything's going the way you want it, and you run into a problem that can cause trouble. It's nice if you can get it fixed and keep moving. So that's what REPL does, besides letting you develop on your phone. Because like I said, I had that one guy who was going out of the country. So in this repo, let me know if you run into problems, because it's definitely much higher level than the ones you've worked on already, and there could be more confusion. I'm going to shut up and let me know if you have any questions.